A single piece of bronze, glinting under the Egyptian sun. That's how it started. A Bedouin guide, crossing a stretch of the Great Sand Sea nobody ever crosses, saw it sticking out of a dune. It was a helmet, ancient, Persian, the kind worn by the elite soldiers of an empire that died 2,000 years ago. But it was here, hundreds of miles from any known battlefield, alone in an ocean of sand. This helmet shouldn't exist. It's a ghost from a story everyone believed was just a myth, the story of an entire army swallowed by the desert. Our story begins in 524 BC. The Persian king, Cambyses II, had just conquered Egypt. He was the most powerful man on earth, and he acted like it. He desecrated temples, he mocked their gods, he believed he was invincible. But deep in the Sahara, one pocket of resistance remained. The Oracle of Amun at the Siwa Oasis, a place of prophecy, respected and feared across the ancient world. Cambyses sent messengers to demand their submission. The oracle sent back a chilling reply. They prophesied a short reign and a violent death for the king. For a man who saw himself as a god, this was an unforgivable insult. It was a challenge. In a fit of rage, Cambyses declared he would march to Siwa, not to conquer it, but to burn it to the ground, to erase the oracle and its priests from history. His generals warned him. The journey was impossible. The desert was a killer. They told him no army could survive the crossing. Cambyses laughed. He was the king of kings. The desert would bend to his will, just like every other nation had. He would not be defied. He assembled a force of 50,000 men. This wasn't just any army. It was a hand-picked legion of his best soldiers, veterans from the conquest of Babylon and Egypt. They were armed with the finest weapons, clad in bronze armor, and followed by a supply train that stretched for miles. They were confident, arrogant. They had never known defeat. They believed their king was divine. They believed this would be just another victory, a simple march to punish a few defiant priests. They set out from the city of thieves, a line of men and animals disappearing into the shimmering heat of the western horizon. For 7 days they marched. They reached the last known oasis, a final outpost of green before the true desert began. Reports from the outpost confirmed the army was in high spirits. They restocked their water skins, took their final rations, and marched on, into the emptiness, into the great sand sea. And then, silence. Weeks turned into months. No word came back. No scout returned. No messenger appeared on the horizon. It was as if 50,000 men had simply stepped off the edge of the world. Back in the capital, panic was replaced by confusion, and confusion by a slow, creeping dread. An army doesn't just disappear. Not an army of that size. Not the most powerful army on the planet. Rescue parties were sent. They found nothing. Not a single body. Not a broken chariot wheel. Not one discarded shield. The desert had wiped the slate clean. The historian Herodotus would later write that a great and terrible wind rose from the south, a Khamsin, a sandstorm of unimaginable fury. He wrote that the storm buried the entire army alive as they were eating their midday meal. They were entombed in an instant, a mass grave the size of a city, hidden somewhere beneath the shifting sands. For centuries, this story was dismissed, a legend, a cautionary tale about the sin of pride. No evidence was ever found. Treasure hunters and archaeologists searched, but the desert kept its secret. Until that single bronze helmet was found, a silent witness, proving the lost legion of Cambyses was real. Their ghost story was true. This mystery has baffled experts for millennia. It defies all logic. An entire army erased without a trace. To join us as we descend into the world's most terrifying disappearances, subscribe to the channel right now. Now, to understand how 50,000 of the world's deadliest soldiers could be defeated by wind and sand, we must go back to the single fatal mistake that sealed their doom. The fatal mistake was not a strategic error. It was not a faulty map or a broken supply line. The mistake was a single man's pride, King Cambyses II. He had just conquered Egypt, the jewel of the ancient world, and the victory had poisoned his mind. He didn't just defeat the pharaoh, he desecrated their temples, he mocked their animal-headed gods, he burned their sacred texts. He believed he was more than a man. He was a force of nature, and the world was his to break. But for him, it wasn't enough. He heard tales of the Siwa Oasis, a remote sanctuary deep in the western desert. It was home to the legendary oracle of Amun, a voice said to speak for the gods themselves. To control the oracle was to be declared a living god, the rightful heir to the pharaohs. And Cambyses wanted to be a god more than he wanted to breathe. His most experienced commanders, men who had fought alongside his father, Cyrus the Great, pleaded with him. In a stuffy tent in the conquered city of Thebes, they unrolled maps of the great sand sea. They pointed to the vast, empty spaces between the known oases. "My king," one general said, his voice low, "this is not the land of men. There are no rivers. The wells are ghosts. They appear in one season and vanish in the next." Another commander, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, spoke of the Khamsin. He didn't call it a sandstorm. He called it the red breath of Set, the god of chaos. He told the king how the wind rises without warning, a solid wall of sand moving faster than a galloping horse. A wind that doesn't just blind you, it suffocates you. It fills your mouth, your lungs, your eyes. It strips the skin from your bones and buries armies in minutes. They begged him to take a safer, longer route along the coast or to wait until the seasons changed. Cambyses listened, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He saw their caution as an insult. He saw their wisdom as cowardice. He stood up, knocking over the map table. "Are the soldiers of Persia afraid of a little wind?" he boomed. "Have you grown soft, living in the mud huts of this conquered land?" He publicly shamed them, calling them old women who feared shadows. The decision was made. The debate was over. He ordered his army to prepare for the march. But they weren't preparing for a survival mission. They were preparing for a victory parade. The quartermasters were ordered to pack the army's finest ceremonial armor, heavy bronze cuirasses, intricately carved, designed to glitter in the sun. They would cook the men alive. They packed towering standards and silk banners, not extra water skins. They loaded carts with chests of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, offerings for an oracle they would never reach. They brought dress uniforms instead of medical supplies. They were marching to impress a priest in an oasis, not to survive an apocalypse. The army was a finely honed weapon, but Cambyses aimed it at the heart of an unbeatable foe, the desert itself. 50,000 men, the most feared soldiers on the planet, turned their backs on the life-giving Nile. As they marched out of Thebes, the locals watched in silence. They knew. They had seen the desert swallow smaller caravans. They knew what the red wind could do. For the first day, the army's morale was high. They were the immortals, the conquerors of the world. But as the green of the Nile Valley vanished behind them, replaced by an endless, shimmering horizon of rock and sand, a quiet dread began to creep in. The silence was the first enemy. No birds, no insects, just the soft, rhythmic crunch of 50,000 pairs of sandals on the sand. The sun was the second enemy. It wasn't like the sun in Persia. This was a white, hateful star that beat down relentlessly, reflecting off the sand and their polished armor, blinding them. The local guides, men forced into service, began to whisper amongst themselves, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They knew the signs. The way the air grew heavy, the strange color of the sky at dusk. They were marching into a place that did not want them there. And their king, blinded by his own divine reflection, was leading them straight into their tomb. The mistake wasn't the first step into the sand. It was the moment one man decided his will was greater than the world itself. On the third day, the water ran out. Not all of it, but the first supply wagons fell behind. The official story was they got stuck in the sand. The soldiers knew better. The drivers had deserted, taking the water with them. The rations were cut, then cut again. A single cup of warm, foul-tasting water per man, per day. It wasn't enough to live. It was just enough to prolong the dying. Their glorious bronze armor was now a curse. The metal plates absorbed the sun's fury, becoming so hot they seared the skin underneath. Men screamed as they tried to unbuckle the leather straps, their fingers too swollen and clumsy to work the clasps. The sound of the march changed. It was no longer the proud tramp of an army, but the desperate clatter of discarded shields and helmets hitting the sand. The desert floor became a junkyard of Persian glory. And then the fighting started. The first murder happened that night. It wasn't a quiet shanking, it was a brawl. A soldier accused another of having a hidden water skin. A knife was drawn, then another. By sunrise, 4 men lay dead, their throats cut, their bodies already being covered by the shifting sand. The desert floor became a junkyard of Persian glory. And then the fighting started. The first murder happened that night. It wasn't a quiet shanking, it was a brawl. A soldier accused another of having a hidden water skin. A knife was drawn, then another. By sunrise, 4 men lay dead, their throats cut, their bodies already being covered by the shifting sand. An officer, a veteran of a dozen battles, tried to intervene. He drew his sword and demanded order. He was met with 100 dead-eyed stares. One soldier, his face a mask of cracked skin and dust, simply spat at his feet. The officer did nothing. The chain of command was broken. Every man was his own king, and his kingdom was the few drops of water he had left. Paranoia became the new commander. Men stopped sleeping. They clutched their canteens to their chests, glaring at anyone who came near. The sun started to talk. At first, it was a whisper on the edge of hearing. Then it grew louder, a hissing voice inside their skulls. It told them their friends were plotting against them. It told them where water was hidden. It promised them relief if they would just walk a little further, away from the others. And men listened. They would suddenly stop, turn, and walk calmly into the endless dunes, chasing a promise only they could hear. The mirages became more cruel. They didn't just see lakes. They saw the green fields of Persia. They saw their wives and children standing by a river, waving for them to come home. Entire squads would break formation, running and screaming with joy towards the illusion, only to collapse on the scorching sand, their hearts breaking as the vision dissolved into heat haze. On the 5th night, the guides vanished, all of them, at the same time. There were no tracks leading away from the camp, no signs of a struggle. It was as if they had dissolved into the air. One terrified sentry swore he saw it happen. He said the sand beneath one of the guides turned to liquid. A hand, made of sand, reached up and pulled him under. No one believed him, but no one had a better explanation. Cambyses declared them traitors, but the soldiers knew the desert was a living thing, and it was hungry. By the 7th day, they were eating the pack animals. The horses and camels that carried their treasures were hacked to pieces. Men fought like jackals over the raw, bloody meat.
They sliced open the animals' stomachs, scooping out the half-digested water and vegetation with their bare hands, drinking it down before it could evaporate. They chewed on the leather harnesses, their teeth grinding against the tough, dry material. They were no longer soldiers. They were a pack of starving ghouls. The last sane men, the veteran generals, made one final attempt. They found Cambyses in his royal tent. He was tracing lines on a map with a dry, cracked finger. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips black. "My king," a general pleaded, his voice a dry rasp. "Look at your men. They are ghosts. We have to go back. There is no honor in this." Cambyses looked up, but he didn't see them. He saw phantoms. "The oracle is waiting," he hissed. "Amun calls my name. He will deliver us. He told me so." He pointed a trembling finger at the general. "You have no faith. You are the enemy." The generals backed away. Their king was gone. In his place was a madman, leading them to a divine destiny that looked exactly like death. Then the world changed. The sun, their tormentor, vanished. The sky turned from a hateful white to a sickly, bruised yellow. The air became thick, hard to breathe. A strange energy filled the air, making the hair on their arms stand up. A low hum started, a deep vibration that came from the earth itself. It grew into a dull roar, like a distant ocean. The sand at their feet began to stir, not from wind, but from this unseen power. Small whirlpools of sand formed and dissipated. The red wind was no longer a story. It was here, and it was coming for them. The roar was no longer distant. It was inside their heads, a physical pressure pushing against their skulls. The ground shook. The air crackled with static, and tiny blue sparks danced across the bronze of their armor. It grew so thick with sand, it was like breathing dust. Visibility dropped to an arm's length. Men screamed, but their voices were stolen by the wind, ripped from their throats before they could form a sound. This was not a storm. It was an avalanche of sand, a horizontal waterfall of grit and rock that scoured everything in its path. The veteran general, the one who had pleaded with Cambyses, roared an order. "Shields, form a wall, dig or you die." He was a commander again, his training kicking in against an enemy he could not fight. Survival was the only mission left. But Cambyses laughed. It was a high, unhinged sound that barely cut through the gale. He strode forward towards the heart of the storm, his royal robes whipping around him. He raised his arms to the sky, a black silhouette against a wall of roaring red chaos. "He has come!" Cambyses shrieked, his voice raw. "Amun welcomes his son. This is not our tomb. It is our chariot to glory." The general grabbed him by the shoulder, spinning him around. The king's eyes were wild, pupils dilated, seeing a heaven where the general saw only hell. "There is no God here!" the general screamed into his face, spittle flying from his lips. "Only the wind! By the name of your father, Cyrus, think of your men, think of Persia. This is not glory, it is suicide." "Back?" Cambyses hissed, his face contorting with rage. "My father was a man. I am beyond him. The gods speak through me, and they demand this sacrifice." He shoved the general away with inhuman strength. "You are a traitor. You speak with the voice of Set." That was the moment the army broke. It wasn't a decision. It was an animal reflex. The last bond of discipline snapped. The general drew his sword. The blade was dull with sand, but it was still a symbol. He pointed it not at the storm, but back the way they had come. "To the Nile!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Follow me and live. Stay with him and be buried." For a second, nobody moved. 50,000 men, frozen between the mad king and the sane commander, between a divine promise and the simple hope of survival. They looked at each other through the swirling grit, their eyes asking a silent question. Then, a soldier near the general, a boy no older than 17, turned and ran. That single act of desperation broke the spell. Another followed, then 100. A wave of humanity, broken and terrified, chose to flee. But others stayed. The royal guard, sworn to protect the king with their lives, formed a tight, impenetrable ring around Cambyses, their spears bristling outwards. Other soldiers, too far gone in their own madness, knelt in the sand, praying to the storm. They saw the king's vision. They believed. The mutiny was on. It wasn't a clean fight. It was a desperate, blind scrum in the heart of a hurricane. The general's men tried to push their way out, back towards an imagined safety. The royal guard met them with spears. Swords scraped against shields. Men stabbed blindly into the swirling red darkness, not knowing if they were hitting friend or foe. A soldier tripped and fell, his hand outstretched to his comrade. But his comrade didn't see him. He was too busy driving his sword into the gut of a royal guardsman. The fallen man was trampled underfoot, his screams lost in the gale. There were no battle cries, only choked grunts and the sickening thud of metal hitting bone. The sound was instantly swallowed by the roar of the wind. Cambyses stood in the center of it all, untouched, laughing as his army tore itself apart. He saw it as a glorious sacrifice, a final test of faith. The general fought like a cornered lion, trying to carve a path for his followers. He saw a guard lunge at him from the red mist. He parried, but another spear took him in the side. He fell to his knees, his sword dropping into the sand. He looked up, and through a momentary gap in the storm, he saw Cambyses' face, smiling down at him.
The general opened his mouth to shout one last warning, but only sand filled it. It was the last thing he ever saw. The roar became a deafening silence. All sound was compressed into a single, overwhelming pressure. The horizon was gone, replaced by a moving cliff of red sand. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was the desert itself, rising up to swallow them whole. The wall of sand, 1,000 feet high, hit them. It didn't just blow over them, it fell on them. A solid, unstoppable weight. It was like the sky itself had collapsed. The screams stopped. The fighting stopped. Everything stopped. The king, the mutineers, the loyalists, the living, and the dead were all crushed together in a single, silent moment. The sand settled, but it didn't stop. It just kept coming, a silent, steady burial. Ton after ton of fine red dust poured down, filling every space, every crevice, every gasp for air. It covered the hilts of swords still gripped in dead hands. It filled the open mouths of men whose last word was a curse against their king. For anyone who survived the initial impact, this was a second, slower death, a conscious burial. The pressure built, compressing chests, collapsing lungs. Darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a physical weight, a solid thing pressing in from all sides. The last sensation was the grit filling their throats, a final taste of the kingdom that had conquered them. A new Dune was born that day, a tomb for 50,000 soldiers. The desert didn't just kill them, it erased them, as if they were a mistake on a map, an error to be corrected. Within hours, the wind, the storm's accomplice, began its work. It smoothed the surface, sculpting the evidence into a gentle, anonymous slope. The battlefield was gone. The army was gone. Their story was gone. Any search party sent after them would have found nothing. Not a body, not a banner, not a footprint.
They would have stood on the very ground where the legion fell and seen only an endless sea of sand, stretching to a horizon that no longer held any promises. The desert had not only committed the perfect murder, it had hidden the body in plain sight. For 2,500 years, the story became a myth, a ghost story told by traders around campfires, a warning against the arrogance of kings. Back in the Persian Empire, the news would have been a shock, then a whisper, then a forbidden topic. An unacceptable failure. How could the world's most powerful army be defeated by nothing, by wind and sand? It was a national shame, buried under official silence, just as the soldiers were buried under the dunes. The historian Herodotus wrote about the lost army, but for centuries his account was treated as folklore, a dramatic flourish, a cautionary tale about a king who challenged the gods and was punished for his pride. But it wasn't a god who swallowed them, it was the earth itself. Then things began to surface. In the late 20th century, archaeologists began to find clues. Not the army itself, but its ghosts. A Bedouin nomad crossing a rarely traveled route saw the glint of metal uncovered by a freak windstorm. It was the bronze eagle of a Persian standard. Elsewhere, satellite imaging revealed strange formations under the sand, patterns that were not natural. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies, strange densities where there should only be rock and sand. Then came the bones. Not just a few, but clusters of human remains, bleached white by the sun. And with them, the tools of war. Arrowheads of Persian design, fragments of a shield, the cheek plate of a helmet. These discoveries didn't solve the mystery. They made it colder, harder, and more real. This wasn't a myth anymore. It was a mass grave. The largest undiscovered tomb on the planet. The Legion remains hidden, swallowed. A monument of failure buried beneath a shifting sea of sand. Cambyses wanted to conquer the Siwa Oasis. He failed. The desert was the true ruler of that kingdom, an ancient, patient sovereign. And it does not suffer rivals. It remains out there, that silent army, frozen in their final moments. A snapshot of imperial ambition meeting its absolute end. So, what truly destroyed the Lost Legion? Was it the fatal pride of Cambyses, the commander who refused to turn back, who saw his men as fuel for his own glory? Or was it the mutiny, the breakdown of discipline that left them fractured and vulnerable at the worst possible moment? The king's order versus the soldier's will to live. Let us know in the comments who you think was ultimately to blame for this disaster. And if you want to venture into more places that erase the people who enter them, subscribe to the channel. The next expedition is waiting.